Hello, everyone. Welcome to Puppet Time Online, brought to you by the Puppet Kitchen. I'm your host, Eric Wright, and for those that are new, Puppet Time Online is your chance to sit down with some of the puppetry community's finest and me and learn about what they know about. And I'm really happy that you're all here. As usual, I have Katie over here manning the comments and questions section.
Hi.
So if you ever hear an off-screen voice, it's Katie. But she will be watching your comments and questions. So if you have anything that you'd like to ask or jump in on the conversation, a question for me or my guest today, put it in the comments section. I think we're on YouTube, which is down there, and we're on Facebook Live. So those comments are over there. And I think Twitch is also over there. So
every time you do that, it's wrong, and I love it.
How do you?
I don't.
Is it really wrong?
Well, it depends if you're on your phone or if you're on your desktop. But I think it's funny. It's like a little puppetry moment.
Yeah, they're like over there.
No. Continue.
I'm glad you're watching the show. Put in the comments where your comments are so that I can point correctly to them. Anyways, I'm really excited to have our next guest on. Oh, by the way, it's our 40th episode.
What? We need to have sound effects like a radio show. Pew, pew, pew.
We started this show on Instagram Live, and this is the next iteration, and I'm really excited that those of you who have joined us have followed us along. You can watch all of our old episodes, or most of our old episodes, on YouTube. We've archived a lot of them, and you can also follow us on Instagram. So anyway, I'm really excited to bring in our guest today. He is an incredible puppet and mask designer and performer, director, co-founder of Thingumajig Theatre, joining us all the way from the UK. It's Andrew Kim. Hi.
Hello. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Fine. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for being here. I'm really excited to have you. Thingumajig Theatre you do some incredible work. So I'm really excited to talk with you. And a lot of the stuff that Thingumajig puts out is giant puppetry and like parade and spectacle puppetry, which at Puppet Kitchen we have a little bit of experience with that. And so I'm really excited to talk with you about your approach and all that sort of thing. But as usual, we like to start out with asking our guests about how they got into puppetry. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Sure, happy to. I started puppetry in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I had studied. I actually wasn't doing puppetry until I finished college. I had gone to a small liberal arts school, and then at the time I was doing theater, sort of more normal theater. I don't know what you'd call it. When you talk, you talk and there's no puppets.
A lot of walking around on stage.
Yeah, people do that. I mean, apparently. Anyway, so I was doing that sort of kind of for fun, but actually I was studying literature. I wanted to be a writer, and I was taking all the creative writing courses I could. And that was something that I held for a good part of my 20s. I was doing theater sort of for fun, and then I was doing more literature for, or I don't know if it was literature. It was just writing for what I wanted to do. And I finished college, and then I got a job. Well, actually, there's a sort of a little sideways thing that happened that for a little while, which is that in Minneapolis, they were just starting this company called Theater Moo, MU, Theater Moo, and it still exists today. Yeah. And this is an Asian American theater company. So company started and run by Asian Americans that were interested in sort of producing and performing plays about the Asian American experience. And at the time, I was very interested in that issue as well. And so I was really interested in plays. And so when I graduated from college, they actually invited me to come and help be a part of the team that helped set it up. So I was really excited, and so I came. But it was a new company, so there was no actual paid work. It was just a lot of
Right.
energy and time.
Yeah.
At the time, one of the producers, who was a Korean man who was studying in the UK, I'm sorry, US,
Yeah.
was had studied traditional Korean mask theater, and this is something that I was interested.
Cool.
My background is I was raised in the States, but I was ethnically Korean, and I was really interested in Korean traditional arts as well. And so I was interested in what he was doing, and so that, because of his experience in mask theater, he was invited to co-direct a show within the Heart of the Beast Puppet and Mask Theater, which is
Sure.
based in Minneapolis. And so he kind of brought me in and said, "Huh, here's a guy. He acts. Let's stick him in a show." And so my timing was just great, because they were about to do a massive, big show with, I can't remember. It was like a cast of 20 or more than that. It was a big show about. At the time, this is 1992. At the time, there was a lot of thought about rethinking about the 500th anniversary of Christopher Columbus coming to the New World.
Sure.
And so and sort of rethinking that, actually, of course, now we think about it and think, at that time people were still thinking, oh, this is where humanity started at this point,
Right.
which of course was a lie. And so
Right.
this was a big community production that brought in a lot of people from a lot of different ethnic backgrounds, and told stories about origin stories. And this is in fact, I think I sent you a photo of it. That was the very first play that I've ever did, which is called Three Circles of 500 Years. So I never done puppetry before at this time, but then I was just sort of cast in this play, working with this a fairly well-known puppet company. And it was one of the rare companies in the United States which at the time had a staff of puppetry artists, which was really exciting. And so suddenly I was there right out of college, and suddenly I had a job as doing puppets. Obviously I wasn't doing a lot of puppetry precise work, but I was just sort of helping be part of the ensemble. And I really enjoyed it, and they really liked me for some reason, and they asked me to right away. They put me into another show, which they were already touring, but there it is.
It is. That's so
There's
cool.
my that's me right on the far right. This was a publicity shot. It's actually not a real shot, but real show. But it was quite an eye opener for me.
Sure.
This is me at 22.
That's amazing.
Anyway, so what was I say? Oh yeah, so and then they asked me to be in another show, a touring kids show, and then suddenly it was actually the very first, that touring show had my very first show of that touring show was actually at a regional Puppeteers of America conference in Wisconsin somewhere. So it was just the most ridiculous thing. Like,
Yeah.
I had no idea what I was doing. I just had no experience, but just a bit of enthusiasm. I could dance and act and
Sure.
do that kind of thing a little bit, but not actually manipulating puppets, which at the time I just didn't know if that was a thing. But here I was performing to puppeteers. I have no idea how it went, but I stuck with it. And then this company was great, and I really feel like so much of what I owe is to the generosity of people at In the Heart of the Beast Theater.
Yeah.
And they took me in, and they gave me lots of opportunities. And it was first I was there as a performer, but then it's one of those companies, like a lot of puppet companies, people do everything. The performers also make, and they write, and they direct, and it's not like other kinds of larger theater where the people who make are the costume makers are different from the set makers, and et cetera, et cetera. I think in a lot of puppetry, it's still rooted to its folk origins of, we all sort of muck in wherever the work is required. And so over time, I started just helping make stuff because I was interested. And then I found that I really enjoyed making. And this is this is I think it's a little bit different. Other people that I talk to, their origin story is, oh yes, I was playing with puppets when I was 10 years old and I wanted to be a puppet. Yeah, I had no idea until I was in my
Yeah.
mid 20s, early 20s that
Yeah.
this is a thing. People get paid to do this. Well, okay, yeah, sure. And then it was this ridiculous point where in my mind I was still a writer that was developing his craft, and then here I was getting actual paid work being a puppeteer.
Yeah.
And then eventually, helping to make plays and direct. That came later, but
Sure.
learning the craft of how to make a puppet play. And then it took me sort of a good few more years of just doing that I realized, oh, actually, I really like this, and this is a thing, and I'm getting better at it, and so
Sure.
I felt like this is what I wanted to explore, and so somewhere in my mid to late 20s, I started to take it a little bit more seriously, and then I spent probably, I say, about 10 years within the Heart of the Beast, but it wasn't completely exclusively with that, but it was mostly with that company. And I learned a lot about, because they did indoor plays, they did plays for adults, plays for children, also big giant spectacle stuff. They do a big May Day parade every year. Well, not last year, and they're sort of sorting things out now. They've had a bit of a sea change, but I don't want to get into that too much. But the May Day parade is where I learned about giant puppets, and I learned about stilt walking. It was just sort of like, how do you bring the spectacle of puppetry outside, and how do you draw a crowd? How do you work with community? And I just really loved that. And that was a specific part of the year, but I really enjoyed that element of it, as well as the indoor puppet plays. And so I learned a little bit of this and that. I realize I'm doing all the talking, so just stop me.
No, this is great. I love it.
Let's see. And then so I also started like, I realized I don't want to just try to reproduce in the Heart of the Beast, because they're their own thing and they're doing a great job. And I realized there was other things out there. And of course, if you know in the Heart of the Beast, you'll know that they had they were very largely influenced by Bread and Puppet. I mean, you can see from some of the imagery, as anybody who does big puppets in the US goes back to Bread and Puppet. And so I think 97, I spent 4 months with Bread and Puppet. I went out for one of their like the second to last or big circus when they did Our Domestic Resurrection Circus. Yeah. And I just threw myself in, and I had a bit of an unfair advantage because I had already been doing puppets for a few years, and so suddenly, like, Peter was asking me to do all sorts of things, which was really great, because Peter's a visionary person, but he's not necessarily the best at training. I hope not struck by lightning for saying that. And so sometimes it's like everybody goes there with all this Bread and Puppet, and then he just sort of like, oh, do it right, or do it slower, no, somebody else do it, this kind of like, he's just got his vision, and that's all he sees, and then he's not really gonna hold your hand and tell you how to do a puppet, I'm afraid. So
that's
actually
probably true for a lot of visionaries and like artistic directors. I think
I don't mean to downplay, because obviously it was a big influence on my life as well, on the work. But so anyway, so I did that, and then they asked me to stay on to do a tour, and this was really an eye-opening experience. We took a school bus, one of them painted school buses, and went down the East Coast, down to Appalachia, sort of Tennessee, West Virginia, all these amazing places. It was a really big experience for me just to do work in that way, and it was really hard as well, because we were working really long hours and just sort of sleeping on floors and eating sourdough bread and garlic aioli, and it was like boot camp or something. It was like, what have I done wrong? No, but it was great. It was a great experience. But and then I also spent some time doing some other things, like taking workshops, like physical theater workshop, clowning workshops. I spent a little time in California with San Francisco Mime Troupe, who I was really influenced
cool.
by their political, the way of doing political theater. So that's not puppetry at all. And also Del
But
Arte,
really,
which was
pretty related, I'd say, for sure.
yeah. I mean, Del Arte does physical theater and clowning in Blue Lake, and I took a really great clowning workshop from there. And so sort of these sort of elements sort of started piecing together, and then let's see, in 1999 I spent 4 months in Asia because I thought, oh, I wanted to expand what, I was an Asian American artist, but actually I didn't know hardly anything about traditional Asian arts. And so I went to Korea for a few months. Oh no, actually it was 6 months. I was Korea for 4 months, studied 3 different styles of mask theater, and then Bali for 2 months, and I studied mask carving and dance. And so those were great. I mean, that was a really big experience. I mean, I don't necessarily use anything traditional, but I think to see how those traditions survive and how people approach the artwork was really influential to me, because it's not, especially in the more traditional setting, going to see like these rituals where mask performers and shadow puppeteers perform in Bali, and it's still so connected to their spirituality and the way the culture sort of comes together for these events. It was really, really eye-opening. It wasn't just, oh, I'll just pay some money and see a show. I mean, there was some of that, of course, but what was inspiring to me was how performance and creative arts and puppetry and this sort of that animation of inanimate objects sort of like takes community celebrations and artistry and then suddenly brings in this element of spirituality. And it was just really powerful stuff. I mean, and I'm not saying puppetry necessarily needs to have come from a spiritual practice, but I think the fact that it has the potential to do that, I think,
Right.
and if you could just sort of bring that into your work, that this is not just, we're not just tricking people into believing this is a lie. This is actually a conduit for transformation. And then what are you going to do with that information? And what sort of sacred space can you hold with your puppets?
Yeah.
And then that's it's a whole sort of attitude shift. This is not a prop. This is not a clever costume. It's a thing that sort of, transforms, and it has the potential to be very sacred. And
Yeah,
I think that's something
I love that, because I always feel like the shows that I enjoy the most are the shows that respect that collaboration between the audience and the performer. That it's like it's a space that you're investing into, and that you're that's a special thing to be in that moment together. And with puppetry, creating this life together between the puppeteer and audience is a really, like, that's something that doesn't need to be spiritual and religious, like you're saying, but having that respect for that moment and that like energy that you share together, I think is really great.
Yeah, I mean, because theater is all about that suspension of disbelief and that transformation where a space or an actor becomes something else, and we believe it, and that sort of leap of faith into that transformation is where this magical place, and all theater, I think puppetry just goes to that next step further, which is that, oh, it's not just this actor pretending to be, it's this whatever, this object, this piece of wood, this thing. And then so that invites the audience to go a step further in their suspension of disbelief into the space that you've created. And so, I mean, it is really, I think it is really quite a sacred thing. And I think we as puppet theater people need to respect that the audience is giving us so much space to, and we need to be responsible for that journey that we're asking them to take.
Yeah, I think that's totally very well said. I think that leads like right into the next question that I always like to ask my guests, which is now that you're here, now that you're in puppetry, what keeps you in puppetry? Like what do you think what do you think keeps you here?
I think it's I just find it really fascinating and always entertaining to just, well, there's lots of elements of it, and I, like a lot of puppeteers, do a lot of different elements. I make and I design and I teach and I perform, and I work with other people to make other things and direct. And there's things that draws me to all of those things, but I don't know. I don't know exactly what it is, but I could tell you what I love. I could tell you
Yeah.
my favorite things, and those are probably what keeps me here. I love to sculpt a puppet. I love to, whether that's just working with the clay sometimes, and it's kind of nice to have an idea and then maybe gather some images, do some sketches, and then just that moment where, I mean, I work a lot in working, sculpting out of clay, and then you either using paper mache, or more recently I've been using Warbler, and sometimes which is, you know, a thermoplastic, for some of the lantern stuff, and maybe you could show some of those images at some point. But but still, it's starting with with a piece of clay, and then that I love that space where you have an idea of what it is, and then you know how big it needs to be, and you know, this bit needs to move, or you have all that intellectual planning and the plan you make with your experience. But actually there's that moment where it's sort of an ineffable moment where you know that if it's not right, it's not right. Oh, who's that? That's interesting. I didn't realize. And this is my sort of, you know, like every other artist, I'm sure it's like you sculpt and you're working for hours. It's like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing, it looks like crap. And then so I start to make it like this and like this, and then suddenly, oh, that's interesting. I didn't see that coming. And then you go with it, and then oh, that's something. And so it's just kind of like trusting your intuition, trusting your experience, but at the end of the day, letting something besides you come out of the clay or come out of the wood. And that, I love that. I love that, because I do feel like it's really magic. And there's certain things that I like to do, like I like to make my eyes like this, and I know that if it's more open or closed, it has certain kinds of effect. That's experience, but actually, that doesn't necessarily mean that all the puppets that I've made aren't great, but the percentage gets better over years. Right. And the photos I sent you are the ones that are pretty good. But there's lots of puppets you'll never see, because I'm not proud of them. So it's not a science. It's not something that, you know, that I can guarantee, but I could say that, oh, actually that moment. And then it's the same thing with painting. I love painting as well, as which is because I think that really just sort of starts to bring life to it. And then finally, when you figure out all the mechanisms of how to safely carry the weight, and I mean, I do a lot of giants, so I'm always thinking about the mechanism of where's the performer, how do you, because with our puppets, oftentimes you have to be in it for 45 minutes, maybe even an hour. So it has to be safe, and also not just safe, but be able to be animated. So like, you know, like every puppet, the articulation of the head is paramount. And so you have to have really good movement. You have to have eyes that are sculpted, painted, and able to really focus on the audience and respond. So that all these things, and then so once you get through the mechanisms of it, and then you do that first test where you put the head on and you start to move it around, and it's just like, oh yeah, this is why I do it, because I love that. Like, you know, like you get in your jive puppet, you go down a random festival or a street or wherever you are, and then like you can see, like, I love this moment where you could see, like, there's lots of people, but that person and that person is having a magical moment. And then I could just sort of go boop, and then and then they really, it's like you could tell it. It's not necessarily always kids, by the way. And sometimes I love it when I get the adults as well. They're like, whoa, I did not expect this, and I did not expect to have an emotional response to something that somebody is in. I mean, you know, not every single person, but hopefully if the puppet is well made, is able to focus, and is performed really with that sort of attention, I think you could have a mop on a stick, and you know, if you do it right, people will say, whoa, that's alive. Some part of me that's somewhere here knows that when I do this, it's responding because of this, and and this is confusing and delightful at the same time. And I think
Yeah.
this is what's exciting about puppetry. I mean, so I mean, those are the things. I mean, I suppose the three things that I love most, which is that sculpting and painting, and then the moment of articulation where you're really connecting with an audience.
Yeah.
And then it's also like a lot of people. I mean, I think puppeteers are puppeteers because they can't really decide on what they're good at. They like to do everything, and so it's kind of like, don't make me
Guilty.
choose. I mean, don't make me choose. Like, I don't want to just be a sculptor. I don't want to just be a painter. I don't want to just make costumes. I want to do a little bit of everything as best as I can, and then the some culmination of it is, hopefully over time, pretty good.
Yeah. That pretty much sums me up, actually. Well, it's really interesting to hear you talk about what, sort of how you approach the design of a giant puppet and all the considerations that you put into it. I know that you also do, you mentioned that you do like sort of theatrical sized puppets, I would say, rather than the like giant parade sized puppets. How do you think your approach to the character design or the puppet design is different for the giant sized puppets as opposed to theatrical sized?
Good question. I mean, I think you can't make a puppet and then well, I suppose some people can, but I don't make a puppet and then figure out what they do. I think it's quite the opposite. Can you show some of the indoor puppet work? I think there's one from Ugly Duckling and there's one from On November Day. So you get a sense of those images. So I think for us, we figure out what the story is. And when I say the story, I don't mean we don't start with a script. Yeah, there's our Ugly Duckling. That's sort of a tabletop version. There's also another photo of us doing marionettes. I'm not really good at marionettes, and I don't pretend to be, but sometimes it's useful to have the ability to have that sort of control and also that separation. Yeah, the photo makes me look like I'm a much better marionettist, than I really am. But that was good because we needed multiple puppets.
Opportunity.
Yeah. It's in 2D space. Everybody looks like a great puppeteer. Exactly. And then there's one more with me and an old man, which is in a World War I story. So these are puppets. They're all let's see. Most of those are paper mache. I think. I like this puppet because he's quite a simple puppet. His head moves and his arms move, but his body is just one sculpted paper mache piece.
Oh, cool.
But it's just sort of that. Oh, and there's a funny thing with this puppet. He's not the first head that on this puppet. I actually designed and made a puppet head, and then I tried to work with him, and it was too fixed, And this is something that's really important to know for puppet makers who are starting out. It's like sometimes you have to figure out. Yes, you might have a very particular character, but how much does this character need to change in order to really convey the story? Is there an arc to this character? And that was a main character, the old man, and he needed to have a bit of joy and delight. And the first sculpture that I made was a bit too grumpy, which is where he starts to play. And so it's kind of like figuring out, when you change the planes of the mouth, somehow you could, of course, when you look up, it needs to look brighter and happier. When it looks down, it needs to look a bit sadder, and that's really hard to get. It's really hard to get the first time because you want a clear character that reads as soon as you see it, but then you also want that ideally a character that depending on how it's performed, it seems to transform. The expression needs to change. Sometimes I've heard from mask makers that the best puppet is best mask rather seems to be like slightly in the middle of changing expressions.
Yeah.
So that not literally happy to sad, but just play with it so that, and sometimes some mask makers work with a little bit of asymmetry for that very reason.
Yeah.
So that when you play it in a certain way, that it suddenly seems to change. And that of course is magic, that it's a hard paper mache or sculpted head or leather head, and then suddenly, just by performing it, it seems to change. And that's, of course, the skill of the maker and the performer.
And some of that is from the just like playing with the shadows that are cast on the mask at different angles and during different moments of the show as well.
Yeah. I remember talking to one artist who started as a scenic designer, and he goes so far as to paint his puppets a certain way so that in certain scenes it's lit with certain colors and it looks one way, and then in the other scenes it works with a very different color palette, and those colors come out more. I mean, I never go that far, but I mean, you know, it's really kind of cool if you start to really play with that. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but
well, so
as far as this.
Yeah, so for theater size, so then how does that translate to a giant puppet where you're out in the open and you're dealing with all light? You know, there's like no change of lights. It's really, you know, what you're, and there's no fixed perspective to the audience either. Yeah. Does that influence how you design?
It's a very it's obviously a huge difference moving outside, because you don't have the disadvantage of working outside is that you don't have control over your environment. You can't control the light. You can't control the sound. There might be another act next to you, or there might be, you know, cars or trains or what have you. You can't control the wind, which is a big factor in giant puppets, and of course rain, but and then and also the audience that didn't necessarily, depending on the situation, but a lot of times didn't necessarily choose to come see your show. You just happen to be in a space that has your show. This is a lot of the work, the festival work we do. And so you have to work in a very different way. You have to go for something that's really dynamic and spectacular. And you have to sort of make something that people say, whoa, what's that? And what's going to happen next? Let's follow it. Or, oh, I didn't expect that. And so it's a different kind of magic. Whereas in an indoor theater, you could get away with just really subtle things because you can control how much light there is, how much sound there is. That's sort of the disadvantage. But the advantage of working outdoors is that you're playing to everybody. You know, I hate to say it, but increasingly, I'm in the UK. I'm in performing a lot in Europe and the UK. Well, I was before Brexit, but that's another issue. And I also do some stuff in the States. But for the most part, a lot of people aren't paying to see live theater as much, and I hate that. It really hurts, but it's the reality. And so it's kind of like, suddenly you're only playing to a very specific percentage or very, very specific audiences. And of course, as all artists, when you put your heart and soul into a piece of work, you want as many people to see it as possible. But there's also a little bit political thing. Like, I don't want people with a certain level of disposable income or a certain education level or even, class that only sees my work. I want it to be seen as much as possible. And I really love that about doing parades and doing spectacle outdoor performances, which is that it really works on a larger audience level. And what you do with it, of course, it depends on what you're doing. But I love the sort of the democratic feel of working outdoors, and I think it's worth learning how to do it in high wind and rain, because you get the audience you get is lovely and surprising in many ways. But it is a skill, because it's like if you've ever seen street performers, and you could, the difference between somebody who holds an audience and builds it to the big finish and somebody who's clearly just people are just walking past. It's miles and miles of, they might have not hugely disparaging talent, but it's just the showmanship and the understanding of what you need to keep and work an audience and build an audience. These are things that are not natural, that you have to learn by failing a lot. And I've really enjoyed that. And same thing with making a giant puppet. Like, you think, oh, I know how to make a big thing, and then you put it on, and then it's too heavy, or it doesn't work because the thing in your mind is very different from what people see. And it takes a lot of trial and error, like anything else.
Yeah. How do you take that kind of experience into account now that in writing new shows? I mean, I've always sort of wondered like how you write a show for like a big parade performance. Like I can totally imagine designing big spectacles, designing things that are that kind of there just to be seen and to be enjoyed and to attract people and to like bring people in. But the idea of conveying story, you know, is always so fascinating to me, and how you keep people listening when they could be somewhere else.
Yeah.
You know.
And this is hard. This is hard. And a lot of our puppets that, like, for instance, some of the photos that I sent you, like the hippo, for instance, that's not really a show. I mean, there's little bits and pieces that it does, but it's not really a narrative. It's more about the spectacle and the interaction.
Yeah, I love
so
that.
That's,
I love the
that,
hippo piece.
So that's a big that's a fiberglass head on and we had a friend of ours build this structure. So I'm pedaling it, I'm driving it, but I'm also steering and manipulating the head at the same time. The head mouth opens and closes, and that really is, that's like that's a what we call in this country a walkabout act. That's not really a show so much. It's not really a story. I mean, we have Kathy plays sort of a mad steampunk doctor, and that's sort of trying to figure out what's wrong with this because it's not feeling very well. So there's a little there's characters and there's situations, but it's not so much of a story. And that's where some of our work is like this. It's just animating spaces and having interactions with audience. So it's kind of like when you go out, we go out for about 40-45 minutes. It's all about interacting and just having fun. It's just a delightful thing usually, because basically you get, here's a puppet that I made, I like it, I'm gonna go out and play with it with a bunch of people, and whatever they do, I respond. And then if they ignore me, I go to the next person. And that's like my job, you know. I'm just playing with a big toy. It's really fun. I mean, it's not perhaps the most it's not perhaps the most profound theatrical experience, but actually the thing that I talked about earlier, which is that this person here and that person there and this child here, they've just had a magical moment because they've just sort of suddenly opened them up to themselves, to that sense of play and that wonder that puppets can do. And so that is really satisfying, even if it's not this whole dramatic arc in 3 acts or what have you. But having said that, after doing that for a few years, so the arc of our history was that we started doing, Kathy and I were both indoor theater artists, and we started doing plays. So like the ones that we showed, The Ugly Duckling and A November Day, the World War I piece, those were indoor plays that toured around, and we set it up and we did the show and then we took it back. And so so we did that for a bit, but then I also really like parades and giant puppets, and so we also did that. And then over time, that work was much more, let's see, people kept asking for the giant puppets, and we said, oh, well, okay, sure, we'll do another one like this. And then suddenly it became like most of our work. And so, and then we specifically started making more street acts, but then we missed the storytelling and the dramatic parts of doing indoor plays. And so this is where there's a picture with a mule puppet and a cranky. We did a show here called Kit and Kabuto. Now this is a show which is sort of going both, trying to have our cake and eating it too, which is that we start the show with this mule puppet, and it's also built on wheels, but it's not there we go. You see, that's Kit. Kit is a sort of a pack mule, and he's got four little wheels, and he's pushed into sort of an arena. We have fun interaction. Kathy's playing music. We have a little PA in there, battery operated PA. So it's playing stuff. And then we draw a crowd, and then we set up a big rope circle, and then we do a show. And it's a 25-minute puppet show. And it's very different from an indoor show in the sense that it isn't one character doing lots. It's sort of 3 different smaller stories, and it's a theme of immigration or migration. And so this one here, this cranky, suddenly one of the sides of the packs folds down, and I pull out a cranky, and then music starts, and we sing this Irish folk ballad called "Across the Western Ocean," which about an Irish woman coming to the Americas and some of the trials and tribulations. And so it's a traditional folk tune, and then we have a cranky about that, and then another later on. Then on the other side of it, we turn the puppet around, and on the other side, there's a whole story about this South Sudan woman who has to flee. So it's a series of small stories about people who have left their country or left to find a better life for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it is political, because sometimes people don't like people coming to other countries. I don't know why, but it's something, of course, I've done a few times in my life, and so I feel very strongly that I wanted to sort of. It's not like, you'll have to believe this, but it's more like let's find a few stories, and let's learn about these characters, and let's relate with these characters, and because I think that's what theater can do, right? It's like we're gonna humanize these statistics just a little bit and tell you about this person, and then you can carry on believing what you want. But this. I mean, because of course, my bias, of course, it's like this. The United States and also the UK. I mean, immigrants bring so much culture and also economy and all sorts of things to it, and immigrants are the hardest working, most engaged members of a society oftentimes. And it's kind of like, where are these ideas coming from that suddenly, let's blame these people who just don't speak your language or whatever, and we just came here 5 minutes ago. It must be their fault, not the ridiculously rich people who are making us live for less and less and less. But anyway, sorry, this is not a political.
Well, and it's important, like you're saying, to humanize them. Like it's not just that they are, a collection of numbers or statistics, but like you're telling stories of one person who you can identify with in this story, which is like, like you're saying, the transformational power of empathy is what it's all about.
I mean, this is our I think our responsibility as artists. Mm-hmm. It's not just to delight and to entertain, but it's also just to, in some way, to engage with the conversation of what's happening today. And so that was obviously, the World War I story, the Kit and Caboodle, the one I just showed you, even Ugly Duckling. I mean, even though that's a traditional story, I mean, it's really a poignant story about bullying and about how finding value. And we just thought it's such a simple story, but it's such a valuable lesson, because we're all freaks at some point, especially those who end up being puppeteers, obviously. And so it's kind of like, you just want to grab these children and say, it's gonna get better, really. I know I know you're a freak, and so was I, and I'm sure so are you, and and loads of people who end up doing sort of unusual things like this. I mean, and there is a place for them, and it's anyway. And then the other show, if you could put the two caribous with the shadow puppet show in between,
the ghost caribou.
Yeah, this is our last full size street act, and this is a little bit different on a few fronts, which is it is giant puppets. Those two puppets on the sides, you don't see the puppeteers because they're doing the shadow puppet now, but they're actually they actually put these puppets on, and the whole thing is about 4 meters tall, which is, I don't know, 13 feet or whatever. And then we have interaction with these, and of course you'll notice right away that they're lanterns. They're illuminated from within, and so that's when I talked about Warbler. This is why I started using Warbler, because we wanted to create puppet spectacles that are also at night, and so Warbler it really diffuses the light really beautifully, and so that there's some LED lights built into that. And then so this one we stop and do a shadow puppet show about loss of habitat, and so this is something that's really important to us as well, just sort of trying to be a part of the conversation about climate change and how we are living well beyond what we're using more materials than the earth can provide. And I do realize there's the irony of making a plastic puppet head to tell a story about climate change is ridiculous. But you know, I don't know. It's
Yeah.
one of those things like, yes, I still have to use a cable tie and hot glue now and then. But even if it, you know, anyway, but it is
Did you want to
something
throw
that
a question in there, Katie?
Yeah, we have a friend watching from Africa.
Oh, great.
Oh, great.
And
Yeah.
Peter, this is going back a little bit, but he had a question about the butterflies you were talking about a little bit.
Oh yeah, butterflies in the production you were talking about earlier.
Oh
And
yes, with Kit and
Peter's interested in
Caboodle.
the symbolism of that.
Yeah. So we have thank you for watching, Peter. In Kit and Caboodle, we have those 3 stories that we tell, each about a different migration, but we wanted a sort of an in between image, and of course, and so we start this thing with a little caterpillar. It's a little bit of a clowning in between stick, and then suddenly it's one butterfly, and we use the monarch butterfly as sort of for this character, and then suddenly there's 2 butterflies, and then suddenly there's more, and then suddenly at the end of the play, the big finish, there's I don't know if you've ever seen these places where the monarch butterflies goes to breed. I saw this one in, I think it is in California. It's just fantastic. It's like these trees are just covered with butterflies, and it's just
they're just dripping with monarchs.
Yeah. And so there's certain ones that are, if they're on this side of the Rockies, they go down to Mexico, and if they're on this side, the other side of the Rockies, they go down to the these around these woods, particular kinds of woods. Anyway, so inspired by that, we have this big visual finale with hundreds and hundreds of butterflies. And so this really for us is to show that migration is beautiful, and that's a phrase there's a political sort of movement about a certain artist has used this idea that actually migration is normal. It's part of nature. It's something that has happened all the time and will continue to happen in history of animals and plant life and humans. You know, we get the things that we consider our national pride from, things that have come from other countries. Languages have come from other places. Foods have come from other places. Art has come from other places, and they all get fused. And this is the history of humanity as well as nature. And of course, so it's just sort of like, zooming out and seeing the big picture, that actually these little conversations we have about borders and stopping people from crossing, and in this country, it's this big issue about they're trying to really clamp down on refugees who come across the channel, and it's just really inhumane kind of policies that they're trying to put in place. And it's not because they're trying to win political points. It's just kind of like how in the same thing in the US, it's not like they're just trying to find a scapegoat, and they're trying to win. They're trying to stay in office by saying these things, that's saying, oh, it's their fault. Right. And it's the same thing in this country, unfortunately.
Playing off of fear.
So anyway, yeah. It's like
you perform you mentioned you take your shows to all different countries. Yeah. How do you see the responses to puppetry in general, or to your shows? How do you see them the different responses in different countries? And do you see people, because of the culture that you're in, responding differently to sort of parade puppetry or that kind of technique?
I think the spectacle parts are pretty universal. I think a good big puppet or a good stilt character works wherever. I think that the way they respond or the way they enjoy it is different, and that's always interesting. And I think that's even more obvious in indoor plays. So there might be a scene where you're used to having laughter or having certain sort of response, and then you do it in a certain place, and then you get nothing. Or suddenly, British audiences are a little bit more reserved, and so sometimes we do a thing and we get used to it, and then we take it to Ireland, and then suddenly Irish audiences we find are just much more. I mean, Irish audiences and this is I'm sorry, this is going to sound a little bit simplistic, but we find it similar to US audiences in the sense that they're a little bit more vocal about what they like, and they let you know right away. Whereas sometimes in British audiences, they're still enjoying it just as much, I think, but it might not be as obvious. And then there was things like there's an obvious thing like we had an experience taking some of our dodo. We have these walkabout dodo bird puppets, and we took them to Beijing, and that was amazing because of course they liked them and they liked to interact with them, but it kind of like we at a certain point couldn't stop, because when we stopped and we started to do the small interactions, which we love to do, we got mobbed to a certain point where we couldn't move around. And then also we made the mistake, I'm sorry, I'm going to perpetuate every Asian stereotype, and I swear it's not true, but they love to take pictures with it and, stand next to it and take photos. And then if we let one person do that, there would be like a queue of 50 people, and it was like the most amazing thing. Like they wanted their photo taken with a dodo bird. I mean, obviously, who wouldn't? But usually, a British audience wouldn't be so bold as to grab my puppet and said, "I'm taking a selfie, goddamn." But and then so at a certain point, I mean, and it's also a different universe as far as the crowds. I mean, there were events where. We were one of a dozen acts, but it was 10,000 people at this festival, and so like the crowd numbers per artist was huge, and so we actually had these security guards with us. They had to like sort of make a phalanx, otherwise we would never get more than a few feet from the green room out, and they weren't rude or anything like this, but it was like you literally had to. So that was kind of interesting, but I mean, I think it's always been really delightful to different people have different responses, but I think the enjoyment is hopefully the same.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. How much do you think about your past experience with a particular audience as you're putting together a show? Do you think about sort of like this is definitely going to tour around, so we definitely need to make sure we can adapt it, or it responds to these different kinds of people that we want to interact with?
Yeah, I think over time you realize there's a lot of thoughts that go into making a puppet, which is it's not just the way it looks, it's the way it performs, but also how durable it is. Like for instance, if we're making an outdoor puppet that needs to last for years, we know that it's got to be waterproof, or at least waterproof as possible, and we know that it has to work in high wind, because in this country, in the UK, they love their festivals, even though it's really bad weather most of the year, and even in the middle of summer, suddenly you could get a lot of rain, and so you could just pretty much. And then, of course, like the caribou, and then there's also another nighttime puppet I sent you, the lion, which was our most recent commission. And we know that they have to perform in pouring rain. It's just a reality of it. So you have to, the way you make it, the way you, the materials you use and how you treat it has to be really, really durable. But also there's practical things we've learned over time, like, what's the size of the vehicle that it needs to tour in? What's the size of the doors? How does it best pack in? One of the proudest things I've done as a puppeteer, which nobody ever sees, is that we have a Ford Transit van, which is sort of like a box van. It's not particularly huge, but it's just you're starting to get transits in the States, but it's slightly bigger than the Transit Connect that you have there. Anyway, but it's a box
like a Sprinter van you would see here.
Yes, smaller than a Sprinter van. But anyway, so this is our van, and so we have to make everything fit into it. But we wanted to make as tall a thing as possible, and so in order to make two caribous that are 4 meters tall, I had to build the body so that they could sort of nest inside each other.
Yeah.
And so if you look at them carefully, they're not actually the same size. One's a little bit stouter, and the shoulders a little bit longer, and the other one's a little bit taller and narrower. It's kind of
That's
like,
cool.
Laurel and Hardy or something. But it's because it was the best way to get us maximum, space as possible, because we had to have it take apart. So it's kind of like that probably took me longer than it took me to make the heads. Trying to figure out how do we fit. Because, and this is the other thing that you don't realize when you're starting out. It's like, you're going to survive as a company if you can keep your overheads low. So you need to figure out how to do it with a smaller vehicle, less people, how to get in there and set up really quickly and come back out. It's all those things. Like, it's like any other business, you have to you have to get your overheads down, otherwise you don't make a profit. And if you don't make a profit, you're going to do it once and you're going to enjoy it, but then it's just really not, Yeah, exactly. I mean, if you have a choice of making a show for 8 people or for 4 people, I mean, if you can pull it off, anyway, but it's something that we've had to learn. And if we're a small company, it's the 2 of us that make most of the work, but we have now brought we do bring in other performers, as and that sometimes take our puppets out. But yeah, I mean, that's something that we do quite a lot of, and it's also different. I mean, different puppets will respond to different needs. I also sent you some of our workshop puppets, and this is something that's a little bit different, which is that sometimes we make things for a community, and so they're not the ones that we take out. And like, this is those birds. This was in Bulgaria when I taught a giant puppet workshop where we made these puppets and a few others, and this was a training opportunity. These are almost all artists who do other work, ceramics, willow, other kinds of arts, and so sort of making puppets as an opportunity for them to learn how to make it. But then they get to keep the puppets afterwards, and then they use it for a parade. And so that's the other element of the work. I've realized we've talked a long time, but I didn't really talk about the community engagement part of it. I really love not only to do puppets, but also to use it as a vehicle to get a community as creative as possible. There's one picture I sent you with the muskox with a bunch of mask characters, and this is the Handmade Parade, which is I started this parade company here. This is in Hebden Bridge in West Yorkshire, and you can see in the back there's this big muskox. That's the puppet that I made, right?
Awesome.
And that's actually that was one of my favorite puppets, because you don't see it, but there's a drummer on top of it, and she has these 2 huge drums. Yeah, and that's a close up. And so when we were going along, there was the percussion band in front, and she was like, blah, and so it had this real sort of visceral effect. But all the people in front of it, now these are members of our local community, and we hold workshops for about 3 weeks. No, get to the other one with lots of other people in it. No, the other way. That one. Yeah. So all those were made in community workshops, and we really love this thing of like, it's not just the big puppets that the professionally made, but actually it's a great opportunity to get a community and work with cardboard and fabric and all sorts, and let them make masks and puppets, teach them how to do it, and then create an opportunity where we can have this. I mean, this is as old as anything, right? And this is why masks and puppets in a lot of communities work. It's the masquerade. It's the time of year where we can sort of like throw away our social norms and put on whatever costumes. And it's a great vehicle to build community, to bring out the most creative parts of it, and it also just bring out the most sort of generous parts of the community. And I feel like, I mean, you see this in certain parts of the States, like in Mardi Gras, and I don't mean the tacky beads. I mean the communities that make the different, the ensembles. There's a few of these events dotted around the country, and it's just, to me, that is like, I love that so much, because I think this is what we can do as artists, is that we could use our talents of how to make something, how to sculpt something, how to make a costume, and then use it as this excuse to bring loads and loads of people in together.
And kind of engage everyone in that sense of play and creation, which is really amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And you just need just to create a space where it's okay to be messy, it's okay to be a bit wild, and we after, you know, that handmade parade that we've set up, what's great is that over time the kids grow up with this, and then suddenly they're really proud of their skills. Suddenly they're stilt walking, and you know, loads of teenagers around Hebden Bridge where that parade takes place, they're stilt walkers, and it's like a cool thing to be a stilt walker, you know, in certain circles. And I just love that. And they're working aside, and they're teaching their parents how to, you know, use a stapler, or this bit needs to be hot glued. And I just love that, using the craft as a way to, you know, to grow a community.
Speaking of which, you want to throw a question in there,
Well,
and then we'll wrap things up here.
Yeah, Peter had a good question, which, I mean, I don't know if it's a good ending question, but it's definitely an excellent question.
Yeah, do you start with the design with character or movement for each show? It's a really good question.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think you need to know the function of the puppet. So you do, that is entailed in the design of the puppet. For instance, this puppet needs to walk. This puppet needs to sit. This puppet needs to pick something up. This puppet needs to suddenly magically fly, or suddenly have something, you know, there might be a certain physical thing that you need. So you need to have that before you just even choose what kind of puppet you might make, or the size or the scale. And then the characters will come out later. I think sometimes I start with an image that really inspires me. It might be something I find, you know, online, or it might be something I've sketched. But then it's always about the function of it, and then the actual character is somewhere between the design and the function, I think.
That's amazing. Well, I have really enjoyed having you on the show today, Andrew. It's amazing. You know, like I said, Puppet Kitchen has had a little bit of experience creating some giant outdoor puppets. This is a sketch from the San Diego Zoo puppets that we made, which is one of our one of my proudest moments, and some of the greatest puppets that we've made. And also, I look at the puppets that you and Thingumajig are putting out, and just it's so inspirational to see all of the places that we could still improve, and the things that we could still be doing to, you know, we were so new at making giant outdoor puppets. So thank you for being an inspiration, and for doing the great work that you're doing. And I can't wait to see all of the things that you all do next.
Oh, fantastic.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's
we'll see
great work you're doing, and I really appreciate just an opportunity for the community to really share. It's really important. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye. Well, we've come to the end of another Puppet Time Online. Huge thanks to all of you for joining us. Thank you for submitting your questions and comments. We're on YouTube, so like and subscribe. And if you want to find out more about Andrew Kim and Thingumajig, you can find out more at thingamajig.info. Also, they've got a really great YouTube channel, youtube.com/Thingumajig Theatre. And they're in the UK, so it's Theater RE for all my American audience members. But the videos that they have up there of their giant puppets are phenomenal. You should definitely check them out. Definitely follow us. You can see more of our work at puppetkitchen.com. And we started this show on Instagram, so you can follow us at Puppet Kitchen, at the Puppet Kitchen on Instagram. We also have a Patreon page to help support this show and help us get more great guests like Andrew on the show to talk about puppetry and the business of puppetry and how to do puppetry and all of those things. Be sure to tune in to us next week. We'll be here next Wednesday, right in the middle of the week at 2 o'clock Eastern time. Usually, sometimes we have a week off, but next week I'm super excited because it's going to be very special. Because my mentor, Dan Herlin, is going to be our guest on the show. He's basically the reason I am doing what I'm doing. I mean, he is responsible. He gave me my first puppetry job. He was my puppetry teacher in college. Like, I'm really excited to have him on the show and for all of you to meet him. So tune in next Wednesday at 2 p.m. Eastern. And until then, I guess that's it, right? I'll see you next time. And just remember, you don't have to do everything to do something. See you later.